welcome back to my channel. I'm Malin and today I want to share 5 practical tips for how to lessen food waste in your home. But before we get into the tips, I want to share a little bit of information about food waste. So as I've been learning more about food waste for the last few years, I was really shocked to find out that 30% of the food produced in the world actually goes to waste. And this is such a terrible shame considering how many people throughout the world go hungry every day. And it's also a shame because of the impact it has on our climate. When we waste food, like for example when we throw out a moldy tomato, it's not just that moldy tomato that we're throwing out. We have to think about all the resources that has gone into producing that food. So there's water, there's land use, energy, transport, packaging, and all those resources are wasted along with that tomato. And then there's also another point that we should think about, and it's that when food goes to landfill and rots, it creates a greenhouse gas called methane. And methane is actually up to 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So this is really detrimental for the climate. And it's something I think we need to raise more awareness around and also combat. And while not all food waste comes from our homes but happens earlier in the food chain, it's definitely a place where we can combat this issue. So now I'd like to share my 5 tips or areas where we can combat food waste. And if you'd like to learn more about food waste, I've written a blog post to go alongside this video and I'll link that in the description box. But now let's get to the tips. A good way to reduce waste in our homes is to start with a good food plan. So what Rob and I like to do is to first, on a regular basis, take inventory of the items that we have in our pantry, in our fridge, on our shelves, to actually remember what it is that we already have at home. And we use that as the basis for planning our meals. So obviously then we go on to make a meal plan, and we do this sort of once a week, and it's really helped us in reducing our waste. So we try to be realistic with the food plan. We try to have some easier meals that we know that we can whip up fast, and some more complicated ones for when we want to spend some time in the kitchen and make something a little bit more fancy. And then when we go to buy our groceries, we come prepared. We have a list and we try to stick to it. And this keeps us from buying things that look tempting in the moment, and it also keeps us from buying too much of something. We also like to think about if we're trying a new dish, for example, if we can maybe buy the items for that dish in bulk so that we can buy just the amount that we need, because it's very easy when you're trying new dishes to buy a lot of ingredients that maybe you don't know how to use up later in other recipes. So it can be a good idea to buy in bulk. I mean, buying in bulk is always a good idea anyway. And the last thing I want to say on this topic of where we buy our food is that we often try to find the perfect looking fruit or vegetable or item, and actually this leads to food waste. It could be a fun and good idea to buy a wonky looking carrot or a not perfectly round tomato, because these are the foods that often end up lying in the food bin until it goes off and it's getting thrown out by the supermarket. So that's a little side note. My second tip for reducing food waste in the kitchen is to use up the whole vegetable. For the longest time I was throwing out the stems of broccoli, the stems of cauliflower, stems from kale, and actually, big surprise, you can eat that part too. I really didn't put 2 and 2 together, but now I cut up the broccoli stem, the cauliflower stem, the leaves from the vegetables, and the stems from leafy vegetables, and I add them to my food. So with broccoli stems, you can just cut them up like the florets and saute or steam or whatever it is that you're gonna do, you can do with the stem as well. Same goes for cauliflower. And then when you are eating leafy greens like kale, you can chop up the stem in smaller pieces spices and saute them a little bit before you add the greens, or you can add them in soups and stews. And another thing that we often waste is the tops of vegetables like beetroot. But beetroot greens are really nutritious and they're delicious, and you can use them in the same way as you're using kale. And I've also recently made pesto from carrot tops that comes out really yummy with some herbs in there, of course, as well for flavor. So there's lots of things that we don't eat that we could, and this obviously also saves us money. Tip number 3 is about getting creative in the kitchen. So when we see that apples and pears, for example, start to go wrinkly or soft and they're not that nice to just eat as a snack or however it is you intended to use it, why not use it up in maybe applesauce, pear sauce? They also taste great dried, so that you can have it as a snack, and this way you can preserve them for longer. And the same goes for tomatoes that are going soft. You can make tomato sauce or roasted tomato pasta. I have a recipe for that I can link down below that works perfectly with tomatoes that are not in their best shape. And other fruits like peaches and nectarines make really nice chutneys, and lots of other fruits as well. So there's so much you can do. And of course this doesn't just apply to fruit but to vegetables as well. So for example, when you see that your spinach or rocket or fresh herbs start to wilt, it's a great time to make them into a pesto or chop them up fine in a salad, and you've eaten them before you've had to throw them out. Another thing you can do with vegetables is to pickle or ferment them when you see that you maybe have too much of something that you're not going to use up in the recipes that you're doing that specific day or week. So with pickling, it's really simple. You just make a pickling liquid. It literally takes 2 minutes. You cut up your veg and you pop it in the liquid in a jar, seal it, and pop it in the fridge, and you can use it for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from then. So you have plenty of time to use it up. And if you want to ferment, it's a little bit more work, but it's a really fun thing to do, and it creates really interesting flavors. I have videos on fermenting on my channel, so I'll leave that link down below if it's something you're interested in. My 4th tip goes a little bit hand in hand what I said at the end of the last tip, which is about preserving the food that you don't eat all at once. So pickling and fermenting are great ways of preserving your food so that they last longer, but I also love to use my freezer for this. So with fresh herbs, for example, you can just chop them up and freeze them and use them later on in soups and stews and pestos, or you can do this with leafy greens as well. And I also love to freeze liquids. So for example, in our home only Rob drinks wine, so when he buys a bottle he doesn't always finish it. So then I like to freeze it in ice cube tray, and then I can use it later on when I cook. So maybe when I make a pasta sauce or a lasagna or a stew of some sort, then I have those wine ice cubes that work perfectly. And you can do the same thing with coffee. So if you have leftover coffee, you can freeze it, and then you can use it in baking, for example, or you can use the ice cubes in iced coffee, which is a really fun thing, I think. Another thing we like to do is to freeze vegetable scraps and peelings. So when I'm cooking, I always have a little bowl next to me where I put the ends of onions, onion peels, peels from carrots and other vegetables, anything you can think of really. And I put those scraps in the freezer, and then when I have a full bag, I go and I make a vegetable stock out of this. So I just pop the contents of my frozen veg scrap box into a pot. I add water in there to cover. I maybe add a few herbs or bay leaf, peppercorns, things like that to give the stock more flavor, and then I let it just simmer for a couple of hours, and you have fresh homemade vegetable stock that you can use in your soups and stews and anything else you can think of. And finally, the most obvious way in this category to reduce waste is to freeze leftovers that you're not going to finish within the next day or two. This is a great way to also have something to pick out of the freezer on a day when you're feeling tired and don't want to spend time in the kitchen cooking. So I know that a lot of people actually actually don't like to eat leftovers, and my best tip then is to make the leftover into a new dish. For example, plain cooked rice can become super yummy fried rice with some vegetables added and some spices. And if you're interested in learning more ideas like this, maybe I can make a video in the future. So if you're interested, leave me a comment down below and let me know. Another way of eating the leftovers, if you're not that into eating leftovers, is maybe to let them be a side dish rather than be the main dish. My final tip is to trust your own senses. We become very accustomed to reading best before dates and letting that determine whether a food is fit to eat or not. But this is not always the case, and these dates are more like a suggestion or a guideline rather than a rule. So what I suggest is that you look at your food, smell your food, and taste the food. So if the food looks good, if it smells good, it will probably taste good, but like the tasting part is for safety, and obviously if something tastes off, it probably is off. For example, when you look at it, food can be separated and moldy. For example, when you smell it, it can smell sour or off, and when you taste it, it's quite obvious if it's bad or not. But if it passes all these tests, then you're good to eat it. Rob and I have used these methods for years, and we've never once been ill or eaten something that we shouldn't. And one thing especially that I think lasts forever, way past the date on the packaging, are dry goods. So like flours and pasta, grains, things like that. Another thing that will also lengthen the life of your food is to store it in the right way. So for example, with nuts, they actually do better in the fridge where the fats are protected from going rancid, and vegetables feel better usually outside of plastic so that they can breathe and they don't become too moist. But there are plenty of tips online for this, so just Google how to store your food and you should find lots of information. I have a little bonus tip, and that is to compost the foods and scraps that you end up not using. And this is obviously better than letting your food go to landfill, but don't let it be an excuse for you to waste food. Of course, it's better to eat it. But if you want to compost, a lot of neighborhoods have composting services, but if you don't, you can definitely do it at home, both if you live in a house or an apartment. And I'll leave some links down below for you to learn more about that. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, that you found it helpful. Don't forget to check out my blog post about food waste. I'll link it in the description box, and please let us know in the comments if you have any of your own tips for reducing food waste. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.